Here's a true fact. You, the person who is watching this video right now, cannot save the environment. You cannot stop climate change, you cannot stop pollution, you cannot stop the extinction of species. You can certainly go vegan, you can go super zero waste, hyper green, mega tiny footprint. You could never even use electricity. And 1 million people, 2 million people, 5 million people, they could do the exact same thing as you. Which, you know, if that makes you happy, do it. But not only will you have not saved the environment, you will have barely made any difference at all. As a matter of fact, you might have made things worse because when you stopped driving, the price of petrol went down as a result. And so now, someone who needs to drive, maybe for their job, is going to do more of it. But you might say, hang on, the price drop in petrol would be incredibly minuscule, even if 1 million of us did do it. Which is true. Much like the drop in emissions would also be minuscule. When it comes to climate change, it's very, very popular to take the grand total emissions that happen on the planet and then divide it by the amount of people on the planet. Or something that's actually a lot more common is that you take the grand total of emissions of a given country and then you divide that number by the people that live in that country. And then we sort of implicitly pretend that everyone contributes that amount equally. There are, of course, ways to get your own individual carbon footprint calculated. It's not impossible, it's rather easy to get. There's a lot of cool websites where you can do that, but if you look at the actual factors of what is happening, you realize very quickly that most of them you have zero control over. A lot of them are just a consequence of you existing in the system, and sure, some people might pretend like you have the option to go into the woods and live in harmony with nature, but you don't actually. That choice is a complete illusion. It's not actually viable. There is a notion of this with some people who have made green a very integral part of their identity. Usually for them, this is also a very big aesthetic consideration in their identity, that if everybody just did that, we go back to the woods, out of the cities, do away with the cars and the factories, and we just live in harmony with nature again, then we could beat climate change. Even worse, there are some people, although let's be fair, it's not many, which is a very good thing, who think that this is the only way to beat climate change. But then you look at the options that people actually have to reduce their own carbon footprint, and you realize that everyone would just have to decide to go back to living the way people did in the Stone Age. And if we did do that, billions upon billions of people would die because technology and civilization developed and has become very effective at optimizing the carrying capacity of our environment. If we all went back to being hunter-gatherers or even subsistence farmers, the overwhelming majority of people would starve. But of course, let's be honest, most people, even the most environmentalists, are not asking you to actually do this because they're not insane. What you are expected to do is recycle, take the train, and turn off the water from the tap while you're brushing your teeth. Which, you know, that's great. I do all of those things. Those are great things to do. As a matter of fact, a lot of people do these things. You may well be doing these things. They ultimately don't really have any sort of significant impact, but they're not hurting anyone, and they're having a minuscule positive impact that is almost negligible. But of course, the thing is, they don't hurt anyone unless, of course, you think these are the only things you need to do. The overwhelming majority of emissions, the overwhelming majority of horrible environmental man-made catastrophes wrought upon the earth are not made because of the choices of individual consumers, but by massive, massive industries with very deep pockets. Now, there's a good chance that your immediate response to this is, hang on, if all of the individual consumers stopped buying all the products that make pollution, then market demand for that would go down, and so production would go down because it would no longer be profitable for those corporations to produce those products in that manner. Which is a true statement. In the same way that it is a true statement if I were to say, well, if poor people just committed less crime, then their neighborhoods would become revitalized, less ghettoized and dangerous, and more attractive to the investments of corporations that would improve their standard of living. It's a fundamental attitude of the consumer needing to cater to the corporation. But wait, the average environmentalist who thinks of themselves as a very socially minded person might say at this point, that's different. No, it isn't. You're individualizing a systemic issue. You're just a libertarian. You're right-wing. And you know, frankly, I'm not one of those people who thinks that there is something inherently wrong with that. And also, I mean, why wouldn't you be? You're probably middle class, you can afford an electric car, you can afford to buy the nice vegan fair trade products at the supermarket, you can afford to put solar panels on the roof of the house that you own, so you can sell that electricity to people who don't have the money to do that. And if you're young, and this doesn't apply to you, it probably applies to your family, who are paying you to go to university right now. And if you look at green parties across the world, primarily the West, with some notable exceptions, most of the policies that they propose could comfortably, at least in part, be located in the libertarian right quadrant of the political compass. This wasn't always the case. Environmentalism came as of like a very strong leftist movement back in its early days, but a lot more rich people have adopted that mantle because they've realized that yes, climate change is very, very real and something needs to be done about it. And to be fair, it's not like they're far right, it's not like they're like hyper ANCAPs, or even very strong libertarians. They are, however, very much neoliberal. They do, in their defense, still have the most ambitious targets for reducing emissions and implementing other measures to, you know, stop all the bullshit that's happening with the environment, and I do think that the targets they set are the targets that we should shoot for. Don't be fooled by the green paint job, right? There is a reason why, in the only state of Germany where they actually managed to form a coalition government as the majority party, they did not, in fact, make that coalition government with the Social Democrats or the leftists. They did it with the Christian conservatives. There is a reason why in the upcoming election, the Green candidate is more popular with the economic elite of the country than the neocon candidate. There is a reason why leftists say, do not vote Green if you want a leftist government. They will work with the conservatives before they work with the leftists, if given the choice. Now, they do swing both ways. They will absolutely be part of a leftist government if it means that they can do something about climate change. Now, this is of course an exemplary situation here in Germany, but I've talked to people in quite a few places all over the world, but the general picture of how green parties and the green establishment operate are very similar. They are absolutely committed to fighting climate change, it's just that their policies are crafted more towards policing individuals rather than fundamentally changing the system in any way that actually interferes with the business interests that support them. Because do not be fooled, there are business interests that support green parties, just like there are probably more powerful business interests that support conservatives. Which of course is the whole crux of the issue, because climate change is a systemic problem, not an individual one. It's like poverty, crime, or access to healthcare. If all of the individual people suddenly decided to behave differently at the same time for absolutely no reason, the problem would be solved. And there's a lot of money that goes into reminding you of this at every opportunity, so you feel like you're personally responsible. Because that way, you spend your energy that you have dedicated to fighting climate change, policing the behavior of other individuals, instead of the people who are actually to blame. Because that isn't how people work, and that isn't how agency works either. These things are systemic problems, and the only way to fix systemic problems is by fixing the system. It is not the responsibility of individual consumers to alter their consumer behavior in order to change the rules of the market. It's not an effective way of achieving that particular goal because it lacks coordination guided by expertise, which is the exact reason why so much is being invested in telling you that it is actually your only viable option. Because it's the less viable option. There is a fundamental imbalance in control over a given system between powerful organizations with a lot of individual leverage that actually coordinate with each other, and individual consumers, some of which may loosely encourage each other to pull the tiny and inconsequential levers that only some of them even have. There's a lot more individuals, but they're not organized. They do not coordinate. They do not work together in the way that, you know, organizations do. And when individuals do band together, they very quickly find out that regulation of the system, of the entities on the other side of the system, the powerful, big organizations, is how you actually most effectively resolve this issue for the individual, instead of policing the behavior of the individual. But of course, a lot of moneyed interests want you to think that if you turn off the lights when you leave the room and you vote for the Green Party, that's basically all you have to do to make your contribution to fighting climate change. But then, of course, in the system where the actual real important things happen behind the scenes, the fossil fuel aristocrats duke it out with the nouveau riche green energy magnates. And though for the Greens this definitely was the case at one point, they do no longer want you, the average person, to band together with other average persons to actually represent the interests of average persons. If we look at the actual policies of Green parties, much like the policies of conservative parties here, by the way, very firmly opposed to those as well, the cost of beating climate change will ultimately be paid by the working class. If we look at the legislature that actually comes out there, what we see most of the time is that taxes are imposed on the cheap products that are not good for the environment, so people are forced to buy the more expensive electric cars, eco-friendly green products, and so on and so forth, to change the consuming behavior of individuals instead of changing the production behavior of these massive corporations. The wealthy, even most of the middle class, can afford this. They're going to be fine. It's the working class for whom these things are too expensive. It's the working class who lose their jobs because the coal mines close and they don't have the starting capital to get themselves retrained into renewable energies where all the jobs are now. The simple truth is that the responsibility for fixing climate change does not lie with the average person, because the average person did not cause climate change. It's the rich, it's always been the rich, the elite, the capitalists, the aristocracy, whatever your particular name is for them, it's always the same people. And it is in their best interest to make you think that you are just as responsible in this whole catastrophe as they are, because that way they were able to make the profit, but now they're able to share the costs with you. Except, of course, they're very good at doing that particular thing, so you will end up paying all of the price, and they will end up making all of the profit. Whenever I hear Greens talking about, oh, we all need to take a step back, consume less, don't buy so many things, shrink our individual carbon footprints, all I hear is austerity, austerity, austerity. And I'm sorry, but I don't want a green Margaret Thatcher fucking over average working people. This is why I personally, when I support green movements and organizations, because I'm very much on board with the cause of fighting climate change, support things like Fridays for Future or the Extinction Rebellion, which are, of course, they're very intermingled and there's like a Venn diagram, a lot of overlap, you know what I mean. I mean, sure, most of the people in there as individuals are completely insufferable people, but as a group, they band together to demand action on the actual underlying systemic issues. In fact, the younger you go with Greens, even in the established Green political parties, the more actually left-wing and pro-Labour they become. And their flagship tactic is picked straight from the most old-school left-wing playbooks. They go on strike. And it's not just the weekly school strike, which of course in 2020 has had a bit of less attention due to certain circumstances that we've had throughout the year. But it's also a lot of other different kinds of strikes, and they've been expanding their portfolio in that regard, so to speak. And I have to be entirely honest with you, I really like the idea of general strikes in order to demand action on the issue of climate change. If you want to actually really effectively fight climate change, you should support movements like Extinction Rebellion, because they actually use effective tactics like civil disobedience to hurt the massive polluters where it actually hurts. But for the love of God, at whatever election is coming up, vote for a leftist party over a Green party, because they all have comprehensive plans to fight climate change. It's just that they don't make the working class pay for it. It is, after all, very much in the interest of working people to stop climate change. And look, establishment Greens, as much as they are a bit right-wing, will absolutely come aboard with that, because it fulfills the primary directive to fight climate change, and they do have a little bit of a pragmatist bend. Don't just recycle, organize. Become part of your own lobby that represents your own interests, and don't trust everything with a green coat of paint on it, because there's a lot of very smart people who would really like to deceive you into giving them everything and you being left with nothing. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or subscribe star buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. I have no idea if they're produced green. That's not really an option that I was able to pick. If I had been able to pick it, I most certainly would have. But even my choice as not quite a consumer is limited because of the system. And in that spirit, it would have been cool if I had said the thing that I said before now. It would have been more fitting, so I'm just gonna say, see you around, cunts.